Hello there, Wanderers of the Night. Welcome back to Midnight Reddit Tales. We've gathered some of the deepest, most intriguing stories the internet has to hide after dark. If you enjoy these midnight dives, please leave a like, subscribe, and join our nocturnal community. Now let the shadows fall. And let's jump straight into the tales.
Story 1. I'm the wife. The cheater. The one who blew up our family. I'm sure that's what he told you, and I guess from his side it's true. He was a good provider. He never hit me, not with his fists anyway. We had a nice house, 2 great kids. On paper it was perfect, but a life isn't lived on paper. A life is lived in the quiet moments, in the spaces between the big events. And in those spaces I was completely and utterly alone. For most of our 11 years together, I felt more like an employee than a wife. He was the CEO of our family, and I was the manager of everything else. He went to work, made the money, and his job was the most important thing in our lives. I managed the kids, the school runs, the doctor's appointments, the groceries, the laundry, the house. I had my own job too before I lost it during the pandemic, but it was always seen as secondary. My time was flexible, so I was the one who had to make it all work. It sounds like I'm just complaining, I know. Millions of women do it. But it wasn't the work that broke me. It was the invisibility. He'd come home, ask if the kids were okay, what was for dinner, and then he'd retreat into his phone or the TV. He stopped asking about my day. He stopped looking at me, really looking times at me. I was just part of the house, like the dishwasher or the thermostat. A functional piece of equipment that kept his life running smoothly. I would try to talk to him, to tell him how lonely I was, and he'd just nod and say, "We're both tired." It was like talking to a wall that slept in my bed. The resentment built up so slowly I didn't even notice it at first. It started as little annoyances, and then it grew into this deep, quiet anger. I was starving for a real connection, and I was living in a house full of food I wasn't allowed to eat. Then Monsieur happened. It wasn't planned. He was an old friend, someone I knew from years ago. He messaged me out of the blue, just a simple, "Hey, how are you?" And I answered. That first conversation was like a drink of water after walking through a desert. He asked about me. Not about the kids, not about my husband, but about times me, asterisk. What was I thinking? How was I feeling? It felt incredible. Our talks became my secret. A little pocket of my life that was just for me. It was an escape. Soon it turned into more. The messages on WhatsApp got more flirty, then more explicit. We started sending pictures. Was it wrong? Of course it was. I knew it was. But it honestly felt less like I was betraying my husband and more like I was finding myself again. In that secret world on my phone, I wasn't just a mom or a wife. I was a woman. I was funny and sexy and desired. It was a fantasy, a character I was playing, but it was the only thing that made me feel alive. It became an addiction. The little notification sound from him was a hit of dopamine that got me through another long, silent day. The other guys, C, P, all of them, they were just echoes of that. Little conversations, a bit of flirting here and there. They weren't serious. They were just proof that I still existed. I knew I was playing with fire. I had passwords on everything. I hid apps, not because I was trying to build a new life with these men, but because I was trying to protect the only place I felt like a person from the man who made me feel like an object. The end of that world came crashing down in the middle of the night. I woke up to him standing over me. His face was twisted in a way I'd never seen before, furious but also triumphant, like he'd finally caught the thief he always knew was there. He was holding my phone. My heart stopped. I'd fallen asleep without locking it, and he'd picked it up. No, it was worse. He told me later he'd used my own thumb to unlock it while I was sleeping. He violated me in my sleep to get into my phone. He didn't cry because he was heartbroken. He cried with rage. The things he screamed at me weren't about us, or love, or betrayal. They were about his property, his reputation. "How could you do this to times me times?" he kept yelling. Then he put his fist through the drywall. The sound of it echoed through the house. In that hole in the wall, I saw my future. This wasn't a man mourning a marriage. This was a man furious that something he owned was broken. He said he would give me a second chance. But it wasn't a chance, it was a prison sentence. The first rule was that I had no more privacy. He had to have the passwords to my phone, my email, everything. He would grab my phone at random times during the day and scroll through it looking for anything. He installed a new router so he could track which apps I was using and when. I felt his eyes on me constantly. He wasn't trying to fix us. He was trying to lock me down. It just made me want to escape more. The tighter he pulled the leash, the more I struggled against it. I found ways around his monitoring. I lied. I fought back. I screamed horrible things at him because I felt like a caged animal. Every conversation became an interrogation. Every night was thick with suspicion. Our home, which had once been just lonely, was now a battleground. And I just knew he was waiting for me to slip up again. He wanted to catch me. He enjoyed being the warden. Tonight, the kids are at his mother's. I had a couple of glasses of wine, maybe more than a couple. I just wanted to feel numb for a few hours. I was sitting on the couch, messaging a friend, a female friend, just talking about how miserable I was. And he came into the room. He didn't say anything. He just stood there watching me. Type. His silence was heavier than any shout. I put my phone down, my hand shaking a little. He slowly walked over his eyes, never leaving mine. He picked up his own phone from the coffee table, tapped the screen a few times, and then turned it to face me. It was a list. A log of every single thing I'd done on my phone all day. He pointed to one of the entries. His voice was quiet, dead. "Who is C?" C was just a guy from an online game. A nobody. We'd flirted. That was it. But looking at the cold hard log on his screen, I knew it didn't matter. To him, a thought was the same as an action. A flirtatious message was the same as a full-blown affair. In his black and white world, I was guilty. I'd always be guilty. The wine in my system didn't make me want to cry or apologize. It made me angry. All the resentment, all the nights I'd spent feeling invisible, all the weeks I'd spent feeling like a prisoner in my own home, it all came boiling up. He's no one, I slurred my voice, shaking with rage. He's a guy I talk to sometimes. Is that illegal now? Is talking to people illegal in this prison you've built? He didn't even flinch. That's what killed me. There was no pain in his eyes, no heartbreak. There was just finality. He looked at me the way you'd look at a spreadsheet with an error in it. A problem to be solved. So you admit it, he said, his voice flat. More lies. More secrets. They're not secrets, I screamed, getting to my feet. I felt unsteady, but my anger held me up. They're the only part of my life that's mine. You don't get to have it all. You don't get to own me. I lunged for his phone to see what else he had, but he was faster. He pulled it back, holding it out of my reach like I was a child. Don't touch my things, he said, and the way he said it made my blood run cold. He wasn't talking about the phone. He was talking about the information on it. My life, which he now considered his property. I just snapped. All the control I've been trying to hold on to for months just shattered. You want to know why I did it? I yelled, tears of pure rage streaming down my face. Because you're boring. Because you haven't made me feel like a woman in 10 years. You made me feel like a maid you were sleeping with. MCP, they made me feel alive. You made me feel like I was already dead. I said horrible, awful things. Things designed to hurt him as much as his control was hurting me. I told him I never loved him, that marrying him was a mistake that I wished I'd left years ago. I threw every insecurity I knew he had right in his face. I wanted to see him break. I wanted to see him feel times something asterisk. But he didn't. He just stood there watching me, his expression unchanged. He let me scream until my voice was raw and I was sobbing out of breath, leaning against the wall for support. The silence that followed was worse than the yelling. When I finally looked up, he was typing on his phone again. He didn't even look at me. It's done, he said, placing the phone back on the coffee table screen up. What's done? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He finally met my eyes. I filed for divorce. Just now. It's electronic. I paid the fee. I just needed one last confirmation that this was unfixable. You gave it to me. The words didn't compute at first. My drunken, angry brain couldn't process it. Filed just now. He did it on his phone in the middle of our living room while I was having a complete breakdown. He hadn't been fighting with me. He'd been waiting. He'd been gathering the final piece of data he needed to close the account. I wasn't his wife in that moment. I was a bad investment he was finally cutting loose. The anger drained out of me, replaced by a cold, hollow shock. You're divorcing me! On your phone. It's more efficient, he said, as if he were talking about ordering groceries. He walked out of the living room and I heard him go upstairs. I just stood there shaking, staring at the wall he'd punched a hole in all those months ago. That hole was the start of the prison. This was him finally locking the gates behind me as he threw me out. A few minutes later, he came back down with a duffel bag. He didn't say a word. He just walked to the front door, put his shoes on, and opened it. He paused for a second, his back to me. "My lawyer will be in touch with yours," he said to the empty doorway. "We'll tell the kids together this weekend. Try to be sober." And then he was gone. The door clicked shut, and I was alone in the silent house. The next few days were a blur. I don't think I slept. I just moved from the couch to the bed and back again. The reality of it all started to sink in. I had no job. Soon I would have no home. My kids, my beautiful kids, were about to have their world torn in two because of me. The guilt was suffocating. It was a physical weight on my chest that made it hard to breathe. But underneath the guilt and the fear, something else was stirring. A tiny flicker of something I hadn't felt in years: relief. The warden was gone. The cameras were off. I picked up my phone, and for the first time in months, I wasn't afraid. There was no one watching me, no one logging my activity. The silence in the house was no longer the heavy, oppressive silence of his presence. It was just quiet. I know I'm the villain in this story. I cheated. I lied. I broke our family. I will never forgive myself for the pain I've caused my children. But my marriage was broken long before I messaged M. It died a slow death from neglect and loneliness. My affairs were a desperate, self-destructive attempt to feel something, to feel like I still existed. His control was his attempt to own something he thought was his. We were both trying to fix a crumbling house by hammering on opposite walls. He thinks he won. He got the moral high ground he got to be the one to end it, to cut out the cancer, as he once called me. He liquidated a failed asset. But he didn't break me. He just set me free. And as I sit here in the ruins of the life we built, terrified and alone, I know one thing for sure. I would rather be a broken woman on my own than a perfect functional part in someone else's machine.
Story 2.
I'm sure he's told you his version of the story. I'm the villain. The cheating fiancé who blew up an 8-year relationship for nothing. I get it. It's a simple story, and it makes me easy to hate. But the truth is, our relationship didn't die the day he found out about my affair. It had been dying for years, a slow and quiet death from neglect. I just finally stopped trying to resuscitate it. We met in college. It was the classic storybook romance. We grew up together, really. For 8 years, he was my person, my entire world. When he decided to go to grad school in 2017, I was his #1 cheerleader. I packed his lunches, proofread his papers, and organized my whole life around his schedule. We were a team, or so I thought. But slowly, teams started to feel a lot more like I was his personal support staff. His life was the main event, and I was just working backstage to make sure it all went smoothly. I got lonely. It was a deep, aching loneliness that settled in my bones, even when he was sitting right next to me on the couch, typing away on his laptop. To fill the silence, I threw myself into my hobbies. I joined a few different sports leagues, anything to get me out of our quiet apartment. That's where I met the first guy. It was never physical. It was just conversation. He'd ask about my day and actually listen to the answer. We'd text about stupid stuff. A funny thing that happened at work, a new show we were both watching. For the first time in a very long time, I felt like someone saw times me. Times not just the girlfriend of a brilliant grad student. I knew I was crossing a line. I wasn't an idiot, but it felt like a lifeline. Of course, my fiancé, let's call him Alex, found out. He went through my phone while I was in the shower and saw the screenshots of our conversations. The look on his face when I came out of the bathroom is something I'll never forget. I was horrified. Not because I was caught, but because I had caused that look. I had hurt the person I loved most in the world. I thought it was the wake-up call we desperately needed. I broke off all contact with the other guy immediately. I begged Alex for forgiveness. I swore I would do anything to fix us. And I meant it. We stayed together, but something broke that day. His trust was gone. It became a permanent cloud hanging over us. If I smiled at my phone, his eyes would narrow. If I said I was going out for drinks with my friends, there'd be a follow-up text an hour later asking when I'd be home. I felt like I was living under a microscope, constantly on trial for a crime I was trying so hard to repent for. I told myself it would get better with time. I just had to prove myself. In September 2019, he proposed. It was beautiful, romantic, everything I had ever dreamed of. I thought times this is it. This is our fresh start, asterisk. The ring on my finger felt like a promise that the past was in the past. We set a date for May 2020. We were finally going to be a real family. Finally moving forward. Then the world stopped. The pandemic hit and our wedding, along with everyone else's plans, was canceled. Suddenly, we were right back where we started. Stuck. Trapped in our two-bedroom apartment with no future to plan and a past full of suspicion. The holding pattern that had defined our last few years became our entire reality. His life was still about his goals, his timeline. Everything we were supposed to do together was always on the horizon. Someday, when I finish my dissertation, someday when I get that tenure track position, someday we'll buy a house, someday we can get a dog, someday. I was about to turn 30 and my entire life felt like it was waiting for his permission to begin. I'd see pictures of my friends getting puppies, moving into their first homes, having kids. Their lives were happening now. Mine was a collection of some days that never seemed to get any closer. I tried talking to him about it, about how I felt like I was fading into the background of his life. He'd just say he was building our future, that I needed to be patient. But how long can you wait for your own life to start? At work, I started becoming friends with a coworker, David. It was innocent. We were on the same project team, so we spent a lot of time together. We'd grab lunch and complain about our boss the way you do. But our talks started getting deeper. He'd ask me about my dreams. Not what I wanted to help Alex achieve, but what times wanted. I couldn't even remember the last time someone had asked me that. One day at lunch, I mentioned how badly I wanted a dog. I was just talking, filling the air. Alex's response was always the same logical shutdown. We'll get one when we have a yard. David just smiled and said, My apartment is tiny, but my golden retriever makes it feel like a mansion. You just make it work when you really want something. It was such a simple thing to say, but it hit me like a ton of bricks. He was a man who made things work for times now, asterisk. The connection with David was undeniable. He saw me. He listened to me. He talked about family and a home, not as some distant reward for years of hard work, but as something you build day by day starting tomorrow. Being with him felt like breathing fresh air after being trapped in a stuffy room for years. It wasn't a calculated plan. It was a slow slide into something I couldn't stop. It started with lunches that ran a little too long, then drinks after work to de-stress. One night, he walked me to my car in the rain, and we just stood there under the streetlight. I knew I should go home back to the silent apartment and the weight of Alex's quiet suspicion, but I couldn't. I didn't want to go back to my black and white life of waiting. I wanted to stay in the color I felt with David. I kissed him. The months that followed were a blur of secrecy and adrenaline. It was wrong. I knew it was wrong. But it was also the first time in years I felt truly alive. I was a terrible liar, but I got better. I learned to delete call logs and clear my browser history. I hated the person I was becoming, this sneaky, deceitful woman. A part of me even wondered if I was just turning into my father, who had done the same thing to my mom. But the thought of going back to just waiting was more terrifying than the thought of getting caught. I came home one Tuesday night, later than usual. I told Alex I was having dinner with a friend from college. I'd actually been at David's apartment. I walked in the door, my heart doing its usual dance of guilt and relief. The apartment was dark, except for the glow of a laptop screen in the living room. Alex was sitting on the couch, perfectly still, just staring at me. His face was pale, and his eyes were empty. The laptop was open on the coffee table in front of him, and I knew in that single gut-wrenching moment that it was all over. My laptop. That's all he said. His voice was flat, devoid of any emotion. He didn't have to say anything else. I saw it all laid out on the screen, my location history, a map of my lies with pins dropped at David's address day after day. He had become a detective, and I had made him one. The dynamic we had fallen into, the cheater and the investigator, was now out in the open. I sank onto the arm of the couch, my purse sliding to the floor. I didn't have the energy to deny it. There was no point. The truth was right there, glowing in the dark. Alex, I started, but my voice broke. What could I even say? I'm sorry felt pathetic and insulting after what I'd done. He didn't yell. I think that was the worst part. I almost wished he would scream at me, throw something, anything to show the hurt that I knew was churning inside him. Instead, he was cold, clinical. He closed the laptop with a quiet click that sounded like a gunshot in the silent room. How long? He asked. A few months? I whispered. He just nodded, processing it. He wasn't asking questions to understand my feelings. He was gathering facts for a case he had already closed. It wasn't a conversation. It was a sentencing. He gave me a list of my crimes, dates and times. I had lied inconsistencies in my stories that he had probably been collecting for weeks. I finally found my voice, desperate to make him understand that this wasn't just about sex or another man. "This isn't what you think," I pleaded. "I was so unhappy, Alex. I felt like I was disappearing." He scoffed a bitter, humorless sound. "Unhappy? We were engaged. We were supposed to get married. We were supposed to start a life." I shot back, the frustration boiling over. "But it was always on your terms, on your timeline. I've been waiting for you for 8 years. Waiting for you to finish school, waiting for you to get a job, waiting for you to be ready. When were you going to be ready for times?" Me asterisk. I tried to explain about David, about how he just listened, about how he made me feel seen. I brought up the dog, and I could see the confusion and disgust on Alex's face. To him, it was such a stupid, trivial thing to mention at a time like this. The dog. "You blew up our lives over a Times dog asterisk." "It was never about the damn dog," I said, my voice rising. "It was a symbol. It was about wanting something, Times Now asterisk. A home, a family, a life. All the things you kept pushing down the road for someday. David wanted those things today. He wanted to build a life with me, not just pencil me into his 5-year plan." That was the wrong thing to say. I saw the last bit of hope drain from his eyes. He looked at me, then truly looked at me, and I don't think he recognized the person sitting in front of him. "Do you love him?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. The lie was right there on my tongue. It would have been so easy to say no, to try and salvage something from the wreckage. But I was done with lies. I told him that I did. I said the words hanging in the air between us like poison. He flinched a small, almost imperceptible movement. But it was like I had physically struck him. He was silent for a long time. Then he laid out his terms for my redemption. No contact with David ever again. I would quit my job. I would give him all my passwords. I would go to therapy. It was a list of demands, not a path to reconciliation. "I'll do it," he said, "if you'll do all that. We can fix this." But I knew we couldn't. He wasn't trying to fix us. He was trying to lock me back in my cage. He asked me if I could end it with David, if I could cut him out of my life completely. I thought about the easy conversations, the laughter, the feeling of being a priority. It would hurt, I admitted quietly. That friendship, it meant a lot to me. That was it. That was the moment our 8 years together officially died. To him, my hesitation was the ultimate betrayal. He saw it as me choosing my affair partner over him. Maybe I was. He later told a friend I looked smug in that moment. I wasn't smug. I was just done. Done fighting, done waiting, done pretending. It was the quiet resignation of a woman who had finally accepted that the dream was over. The remorse I felt in 2017 was for hurting our future together. But in that living room, I realized that Future had been dead for a long time. I wasn't blowing anything up. I was just walking away from the rubble. He told me to pack a bag and leave. The next few weeks were a blur of logistics and quiet heartbreak. I stayed on a friend's couch feeling like a ghost. We communicated through text messages about who would get the couch and who would keep the blender. Dividing 8 years of a shared life is a brutal process. Every object held a memory, and I had to sort them into his and hers piles. Telling my family was its own special kind of hell. My mom cried. My dad, the man whose infidelity had broken our family years ago, had the nerve to look disappointed in me. The irony was suffocating. I'd spent my whole life promising myself I would never be like him or my sister, who had also cheated on her husband. Yet here I was, another branch on a rotten family tree. The judgment from our mutual friends was swift. I was the villain, the heartless cheater who threw away a perfectly good man. And in their story, I was. Alex was a good man. He was kind and smart and loyal. He just wasn't my man anymore. He deserved someone who was excited about his someday. I deserved someone who was excited about my now. I don't know if I'll end up with David. Honestly, this was never really about him. He was a catalyst, a glimpse of a different kind of life, but he wasn't the destination. This was about me. It was about me finally refusing to be a supporting character in someone else's story. I hurt Alex. I know that, and I will carry that regret with me forever. I took a good, loving person, and I shattered his trust and his heart. There's no justifying that. But I can't regret choosing myself. I'm 30 years old, and for the first time my life feels like my own. It's messy and uncertain, and some nights the loneliness is so heavy it feels hard to breathe. But it's real. It's happening now. I'm no longer waiting for someday.
Story 3.
I know what he told you. I'm the monster. The cheating wife who blew up our perfect little family for no reason. I'm sure he painted himself as the devoted dad. The struggling student, the man who did everything right only to be betrayed in the worst way possible. He's good at that, playing the victim. He's had a lot of practice. What he probably didn't tell you is what our life was really like for the last few years. It wasn't a marriage. It was a business arrangement where I was the silent partner who funded the entire operation. We'd been together for 11 years, married for 4. I loved him, or at least I loved the man he used to be. But somewhere along the line, we stopped being partners and started being co-workers in the business of running a household. My job is demanding. I manage a big team. I travel. And the pressure is constant. I'd come home, my brain fried from putting out fires all day, and I'd try to talk to him about it. I'd try to explain the politics, the stress of a deadline, or even just share a small win, and I would watch his eyes glaze over. He'd nod, say, "Aha," but he wasn't there. He was thinking about his next exam or what our son needed for daycare the next day. He decided to go back to school, a dream I supported and paid for, but it became a wall between us. It was his world, and I was just the ATM that kept it running. He called himself the primary parent. He said it with this heavy sigh like it was a cross he had to bear. He loved our son, I know he did, but he wore that title like a badge of martyrdom. It was his excuse for everything. Can't listen to you talk about your career. Sorry, I was up all night with the kid. Can't be an emotional support system for your wife who is paying all the bills? Well, I'm the primary parent. It's exhausting. It was the perfect excuse to check out of being a husband. I became a ghost in my own house. I provided the money, I managed the schedules, I made sure everything ran smoothly. But times wasn't there. Nobody saw times me, asterisk. Then there was David. He's my coworker. I know a classic cliche, but you have to understand. When I talked to David, he got it. He didn't just hear the words, he understood the language. Pressure from upper management. The frustration of a project. Delay, the specific kind of exhaustion that comes from being responsible for so many people. He was in the trenches with me. A conversation with him over coffee was more connection than I'd felt with my husband in years. For the first time, someone looked at me and didn't see a mom, a wife, or a walking bank account. They saw a person. It started small back in the summer of 2020. Just talking. We'd complain about our lives at home. His wife was emotionally distant. My husband was a roommate. I was subsidizing. It was a lifeline. Finding someone who understood that specific brand of loneliness felt like coming up for air after being held underwater. At work in the lab, it became more. A look that lasted a second too long. His hand brushing mine when he passed me a file. Tiny things that felt like a jolt of electricity in my otherwise numb life. One afternoon, we were working late. We were both frustrated and tired. He said something shockingly bold about his wife and their dead bedroom. It was crass, but honest. I didn't believe him, and I laughed. "Sure you would," I said, calling his bluff. He got quiet, looked right at me, and said, "I'm not bluffing." The air in the room changed. An hour later, he proved it. It wasn't romantic. It was reckless and stupid and happened in an empty office. And it was the first time I had felt truly, intensely desired. In what felt like a decade. It wasn't even about the act itself. It was about the transgression. It was about doing something that was just for me, something that wasn't for my family or my husband or my job. The business trip was a few weeks later. It felt inevitable. We both knew where it was going. I packed a bag, and for the first time in years, I packed something that wasn't practical or comfortable. I packed lingerie. In the hotel room, before he got there, I put it on and looked at myself in the mirror. I didn't see a tired mom with spit up on her shoulder. I didn't see a stressed out manager. I saw a woman, and I was about to be with a man who saw that woman too. I wanted one night, just one, where I wasn't anyone's mother or provider or solution to a problem. Just as I was finally getting that escape, my phone lying on the nightstand lit up and started to buzz. Then again. And again. It was my husband. Call after text after call. I ignored them, but then the preview popped up on the screen times. Our son is crying for you. He won't stop. Asterisk. Another one times. Where are you? I need your help. Asterisk. It was like a leash yanking me right back to reality. Hundreds of miles away, and his needs, always his needs, were pulling me out of the one moment that was supposed to be mine. It was a brutal reminder that I wasn't allowed to have this. I wasn't allowed to be anything other than what they needed me to be. It killed the perfect fantasy of the moment, but it didn't stop what happened next. The guilt on the flight home was bad, but underneath it was something else, a strange sense of peace. The secret was mine. The feeling was mine. I thought I could just box it up, hide it away, and go back to my life as the family engine. I just had to act normal. When I walked through the door, the house was quiet. Too quiet. My husband was on the couch, but he didn't get up to hug me. He just sat there. I tried to make small talk, asking about our son, about his classes. He gave one-word answers. The next day was the same. A thick, heavy tension filled every room. I kept telling myself I was just being paranoid. That night, I came downstairs to get a glass of water. The living room was dark except for a small rectangular glow. It was him sitting on the couch in the exact same spot. He wasn't watching TV or reading. He was just sitting there staring. As my eyes adjusted to the dark, I saw what he was holding. My stomach dropped. It was my phone. The screen was on bright in the darkness, and he was slowly scrolling. He didn't seem to notice me at first. Then he stopped and his head slowly lifted. He looked right at me, his face pale and empty, and said nothing at all. The silence in that dark room was the loudest thing I had ever heard. It was heavier than screaming. I felt like the air had been sucked out of my lungs. I just stood there, clutching my empty glass, waiting for him to explode. But he didn't. He just kept that blank, dead look on his face. "Who is he?" he finally asked. His voice was flat. No anger, no sadness, just nothing. And the craziest thing happened. I felt a wave of relief. The hiding was over. The lying was over. I was so tired of carrying the weight of it all, of pretending to be the perfect wife and mother, while a part of me was screaming inside. "His name is David," I said. "He's on my team at work." I thought that would be the start of a real conversation. I thought he'd ask me times why, asterisk. Why was I so unhappy? What had gone so wrong between us that I would do something like this? I was ready to tell him everything. About the loneliness, about feeling invisible, about being nothing more than a walking, talking paycheck that kept his life afloat. But he never asked. Instead, he started an interrogation. When did it start? What did you do? Where did it happen? He wanted a play-by-play. He wanted every single graphic detail from the office to the hotel room. It wasn't the sound of a heartbroken husband trying to understand his wife's pain. It was the sound of a prosecutor gathering evidence for a trial. He wanted to know exactly how he had been wronged, so he could build his case against me. I told him everything because, at that point, what did it matter? The damage was done. With every detail I gave him, I could see him building the narrative in his head. He was the good guy, the victim. I was the monster. In the weeks that followed, our house became a different kind of prison. The quiet tension was gone, replaced by this awful forced effort. Suddenly, he was Mr. Attentive. He wanted to know about my day. He'd make dinner. And he wanted sex. All the time. At first I thought maybe it was his way of trying to reconnect, to reclaim what we'd lost. But it didn't feel like that. It didn't feel like passion or love. It felt possessive. It felt like he was marking his territory, trying to physically erase what I'd done with someone else. It was desperate and ugly, and most nights I would just lie there and stare at the ceiling, feeling more alone than ever. He started going to therapy. He announced it one night like he was receiving an award. "I'm getting help to process this trauma," he said. A week later, he tried to use it against me. "My therapist thinks it would be beneficial if you came, or went on your own." When I said no, he scoffed. "You're just too weak to face what you did, aren't you?" Weak! I wanted to scream. Why would I pay a stranger $100 an hour to sit in a room and tell me what everyone else already has, he told my mother and my brother. I came home one day and knew just by the way he was looking at me. My phone buzzed. It was my mom. Her text was cold and simple. "I am so disappointed in you. How could you do this to him? Not, 'Are you okay?' Not, 'What's going on?' Just shame." They sided with him instantly. No questions asked. I was the villain, case closed. So no, I wasn't going to therapy to have another person validate his victimhood and tell me I was a bad person. I already knew that's what they thought. My anger started to spill out in ugly ways. I know it's cruel when I call him an idiot or shut him down when he tries to talk about his feelings. I see the hurt in his eyes. But it's a defense mechanism. It's the only way I can make him feel even a tiny fraction of the invisibility I've been feeling for years. He ignored me when I was begging for his attention when I was drowning right next to him. But now that I've set the house on fire, he's suddenly the world's most attentive husband. He only started paying attention when my actions hurt times him, asterisk. The fact that I still work with David is his favorite weapon. "Did you see him today? Did he talk to you? You need to quit." How can we fix this if you see him every day? He doesn't get it. I can't just quit my job. It's the only thing paying for his school, our mortgage, our son's everything. It's the engine that runs this entire family, the engine I've been operating alone for years. He sees my job as a link to my affair, but I see it as the only thing keeping a roof over his head. The irony is suffocating. And that's the whole problem, isn't it? He's obsessed with the affair. He thinks that's what's broken. He wants to fix my cheating. He wants me to quit my job, go to therapy, and confess my sins until I've been properly punished. And he feels secure again. But he still doesn't see the truth. The affair wasn't the disease. It was a symptom. The disease was our marriage. The disease was the profound, crushing loneliness of being partners with someone who only saw you as a utility. He's trying to put out the fire, but he refuses to look at what caused it in the first place. He wants to repair the damage from the affair, but he still has no interest in repairing the marriage that led me to it. So we go on like this in this broken house, him playing the martyr and me playing the villain. And I'm just as invisible as I was before, only now I have a new label to go with the loneliness.
Story 4.
I'm probably the villain in his story. I'm the cheating wife, the bad mom, the reason everything fell apart. I get it. From the outside, that's exactly what it looks like. But you've only heard his side. You've never heard about the cage. My entire life up until I met him was planned out for me. My parents were experts in control. Not the yelling kind, but the quiet, smiling, disappointed kind, which is so much worse. They picked my clothes, my friends, my college major. Every choice I made had to be approved by them. I felt less like a daughter and more like a project they were managing. When I moved to the city for my first real job, I felt like I had escaped. And then I met him. He was exciting, ambitious. He didn't care who my parents were or what they thought. He saw me, just me. Our first few months were a blur of late nights, big dreams, and this incredible feeling of being free. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was in control of my own story. I wasn't just my parents' perfect daughter anymore. I was his partner. I was my own person. Then I saw the 2 pink lines on a pregnancy test. Just like that, the walls I had just broken through started to build themselves back up around me. A baby wasn't in my plan. My plan was to figure out who I even was. But he was so happy. He had his fun in college, he said. He was ready to settle down to be a dad. He talked about mortgages and minivans like they were an adventure. For him, a family was the finish line. For me, it felt like I was being sent right back to the starting line of a race I never even wanted to run. We got married. Not because we were forced to, but because it was the right thing to do. My parents were thrilled. They finally had their project back on track. He was a good man, a great father. He decided to go for his master's degree while working full-time. He was building a future for us, and I was so proud of him. But I was also so incredibly jealous. He had a goal, an escape from the diapers and the bills and the endless days. His life was full of classes, projects, and colleagues. My life was about nap schedules and grocery lists. He would come home exhausted and stressed, and I would be waiting exhausted and empty. My sacrifice was my entire self. I was a mother and a wife before I ever got the chance to be a woman. He thought he was being a hero by giving me permission to have a girls' night on a Saturday. He'd say, "Go have fun, you deserve it, I've got this." He never understood that I didn't want his permission. I wanted a partner in crime. I wanted him to look at me and see the woman he first met, the one who wanted to burn it all down, not the one who managed his household. Instead, I had a warden, a kind, loving warden, but a warden nonetheless. He was the calm, steady rock, and I was the crazy storm he had to deal with. The cheating started small. A flirty email with a coworker. It was stupid, but it was a spark. It was someone seeing me as something other than a mom. It made me feel like I still existed. The sexting wasn't about the other person. It was a secret world on my phone where I made the rules, where I was desired, where I was in control. Then came the one-night stands. After a few drinks with my friends, I'd find myself talking to a stranger at a bar. For a few hours, I could be anyone I wanted. With them, there was no past and no future. There was no sick kid at home or a mountain of laundry. It was just a moment. A brief, reckless moment of feeling alive and free. I know how terrible that sounds. It wasn't a betrayal of my husband, not in my mind. It was a betrayal of the life that was suffocating me. It was the only way I could breathe. He found out, of course. He calls it D-Day. He picked up my phone to look something up, and he saw the messages. I remember the look on his face. The pure shock and pain. Hating myself for causing that pain is the one thing I've never been able to justify. But underneath the guilt, there was also a tiny bit of relief. The secrets were gone. I didn't have to pretend anymore. We went to counseling. I was diagnosed with a few things mostly tied to my controlling upbringing. I finally had the words to explain the pressure I felt, the suffocation. I thought times, okay, now he gets it. Now he'll understand why I did what I did. Asterisk. He suggested we move across the country. A fresh start. A way to get away from my parents, from the people who knew, from the ghosts of my mistakes. And for a while, it was better. We had a bigger house, a new city to explore. But a bigger cage is still a cage. The same emptiness came creeping back. I made new friends. He called them unsavory, but they were just people who didn't care about my past. They wanted to have a good time, and so did I. The drugs weren't about getting hooked. They were about turning off my brain. A little pill could make the screaming voice in my head go quiet for a few hours. It was another escape, another way to feel something other than trapped. He saw me send a heart emoji to a guy from my new friend group and lost his mind. He saw it as proof I was cheating again. I saw it as a thank you for a ride home. He just couldn't see the difference between a real betrayal and a desperate attempt to feel normal. Things have been tense for months. He's been watching me. I can feel it. He checks my location on his phone. He asks too many questions about who I'm with. He's looking for a reason to confirm what he already believes, that I'm broken, that I can't be fixed. Just now, the dog started scratching at the back door to be let out. It's late, and we were both just sitting on the couch pretending to watch a movie. My phone's dead, he said, not looking at me. Can I use yours to turn off the back alarm? My heart stopped. My phone was on the coffee table between us. It was the last piece of my life that was just mine. He reached for it, and I didn't say a word. I just watched as he picked it up, his thumb hovering over the screen. He unlocked it, he knows my password, and his eyes flickered across the notifications. And then he stopped. His whole body went still. He wasn't looking at the alarm app anymore. He was just staring at the screen, and I knew he'd found something. He hasn't looked up at me yet, but I can feel his anger filling up all the air in the room. He finally looked up from the phone, and the look in his eyes wasn't the same as the first time. There was no wild, shocked pain, no confusion. This was something quieter, colder, and so much worse. It was certainty. He had been looking for this for proof, and now he had it. He slowly placed the phone back on the coffee table, perfectly centered, like it was evidence in a crime scene. "So that's it, then?" he said. His voice was flat, empty. The dog was still whining at the door. "It's not what you think," I said, and the words sounded weak, even to me. "You're seeing pieces of conversations with no context." Context. He finally turned his whole body to face me. "What's the context for you sending heart emojis to some guy you just met? What's the context for your old coworker sending you a message saying, 'Wow,' at 2 in the morning? What's the context for all of this? For any fine of this? The context is that it's my life. A life you know nothing about because you never bothered to ask." The anger started to bubble up, hot and fast. It was easier than the fear. "You just watch me. You track my location. You look over my shoulder. You were never trying to trust me. You were waiting to catch me." "Catch you," he let out a short, bitter laugh. "I moved us 2,000 miles across the country. I left my job, my friends, my whole life behind so we could have a fresh start. So you could get away from your parents. So we could get away from the mess you made. I did all of that. Worked my ass off. Finished my master's, took care of our child, all while you were out making new friends and finding new ways to set our lives on fire. I didn't have to catch you. You were screaming to be caught." Every word was a punch. He was using my own history against me, painting me as a charity case he'd tried to save. "You didn't do that for me," I shot back, my voice shaking. "You did it for you, to fix the problem, to make your life perfect again. You never once tried to understand why any of it happened. You just slapped a diagnosis on me from a therapist and thought moving would cure it. A bigger house is just a bigger cage. And you're the one who locked the door. I'm the warden. I'm the one who paid for you to sit at home. I'm the one who took over every single night so you could go out with your friends and get high. Is that what a warden does?" He stood up then, and I flinched. He'd never been violent, but his anger felt huge in the small room. "You see, that's all you see. The drugs, the friends. You don't see the woman who was so lonely and so empty that she would do anything to feel something, anything at all. You don't see the girl who was never allowed to make a single choice for herself, who jumped from her parents' house into being a mom overnight. You see a problem to be managed, not a wife who was drowning right next to you. I see a wife who cheated on me. Twice," he said, his voice dropping again back to that dead cold tone. "I see a mother who chose strangers and drugs over her own family. That's what I see. I'm done trying to see anything else." He turned and walked out of the living room. I heard our bedroom door click shut. He didn't slam it. It was a quiet, final sound. The dog was still scratching at the door. I just sat there listening to the silence he left behind. The next few days were a special kind of hell. We lived in the same house like ghosts. He slept on the couch. We spoke only when it was about our son's schedule's meals, who was doing pickup. The conversations were short, functional. He was polite. It was terrifying. The anger was gone, replaced by a calm, methodical detachment. I'd see him on his laptop at night, and I knew he wasn't watching Netflix. He was making plans. He was plotting his escape. I tried to talk to him once. I found him in the kitchen making coffee, his back to me. "Can we please just talk about this?" I asked. He didn't turn around. He just kept stirring his coffee. "There's nothing to talk about. I saw the messages. I know what you've been doing. We're past talking." "So what? You're just going to give up?" He finally turned, leaning back against the counter. He looked exhausted. "Give up? I've been fighting for this marriage since the day I found those first texts years ago. I've been fighting while you were out doing whatever it is you do. I'm not giving up. I'm surrendering. There's a difference." And that was it. That was when I knew it was really over. He wasn't my partner anymore. He wasn't even my warden. He was just a man I lived with, counting down the days until he could leave. The irony is, for the first time, the cage door was wide open. I could do whatever I wanted. Go out, see my friends, not come home until morning. He didn't care anymore. And without his judgment, without the bars he represented, I suddenly felt no desire to run. The rebellion was pointless when there was no one left to rebel against. He told me he'd found an apartment a week later. He was calm and organized. He had a spreadsheet for how we would divide our things, a proposed custody schedule. He had thought of everything. He had been building this new life for himself in secret, right under my nose. The same way I had built mine. I look back now and I don't know who to be angry at. My parents for turning me into someone who only knew how to break rules to feel free. Him for loving the idea of a family more than he tried to understand the woman who gave it to him, or myself for hurting the one person who, in his own flawed way, really did try to build me a home. He thinks I'm the villain of his story, the one who destroyed everything. And maybe I am. I made choices that hurt him, choices I can't take back. But my story isn't about a husband or a series of affairs. It's about a woman who was screaming for help in a soundproof room. He couldn't hear me. He only saw the wreckage I left behind while I was trying to punch my way out. He's moving out next week. He thinks this is the end of our life together. He's right. But it feels more like he's finally leaving a woman he never really met in the first place. And now for the first time I have to figure out who she is all by myself.
Story 5.
I know what he wrote. I'm sure to thousands of people I'm just another cheating wife, a monster who blew up her family for a cheap thrill. And maybe I am. But his story starts on a Thursday with a pin on a map. Mine starts years earlier, in the silence of our own home. Our marriage didn't die in a hotel room. It died slowly, quietly, in between sorting laundry and paying the mortgage. We weren't a husband and wife anymore. We were co-CEOs of a messy, underfunded startup called Our Family. Our conversations were board meetings. Who's picking up the kids? Did you remember to take out the recycling? The gas bill is due. We were a team, a functional unit, but we were no longer partners. He'd sit on the couch next to me, scrolling through his phone, and I'd be scrolling through mine. And the space between us felt like a mile-wide canyon. I'd try, sometimes, really try to talk to him. About my day, about something funny I saw, about a fear I had. He'd just nod, say, "Uh-huh," his eyes still glued to the screen. I felt completely, utterly invisible. Then came David from work. He isn't some movie star. He's just a normal guy. But he did something my husband hadn't done in years he saw me. He'd ask how my weekend was and actually wait for the answer. He'd remember I mentioned my daughter had a cold and ask how she was feeling a few days later. He laughed at my stupid jokes. It started with emails, then chat messages. Nothing dirty or crazy, just connection. It felt like finding a glass of water in the middle of a desert. That's when my phone became my private space. Before it was a family tool, the shared calendar, the grocery list app, the group chat with the school moms. But now it was my lifeline. It was where I could be a person again, not just a function. It held conversations where someone thought I was interesting, where I could be funny and smart. So yes, I started keeping it with me at night. I'd plug it in on my nightstand instead of the kitchen counter. It felt like the only thing in the whole house that was just for me, and I guarded it like a dragon. The ups and downs he mentioned were just long, flat stretches of me feeling profoundly alone. The night before everything fell apart, it all came to a head. He came into the bedroom while I was getting ready for bed, and his face was all wrong. It was puffy and red. He just stood there for a minute before he asked, "Are you seeing someone else?" The question hung in the air, heavy and ugly. He started crying these big gulping sobs, and my first thought wasn't guilt. It was exhaustion. Here we go again. I was supposed to manage this. I was supposed to fix his feelings while mine were screaming inside my own chest. I just felt so tired. "No?" I said. And at that moment, it didn't feel like a complete lie. Was I seeing David? Not like he meant. I was having an emotional escape. How do you explain that? How do you say, "No, I'm not sleeping with another man, but I am in love with the idea of not being your household manager anymore, so I just said no"? Then I said the truest thing I'd said in months. I just need some space. He took that to mean he was being too clingy, I guess. He just nodded and left the room. But I meant space from my entire life. The next day was Thursday. I'd already told my husband I was going for drinks with my friend Sarah from work. It was a lie. I'd set up a week before a little escape hatch I built for myself. I didn't even know if I was going to use it, but I needed to know it was there. After the fight, the night before, I knew I had to. I couldn't go home. I couldn't sit on that couch and pretend everything was fine for one more night. I left work early. I told David I needed to talk, and we agreed to meet. I drove and my hands were shaking on the steering wheel. Every part of me was screaming, "Turn around, go home, be the good wife, the good mother." But another part, a part I hadn't heard from in a decade, was whispering, "Keep going, this is for you." We ended up at a hotel. It wasn't planned, not really. It just sort of happened. It wasn't about love or passion. In that sterile beige room, I wasn't mom. I wasn't wife. I wasn't the person who knew where the extra light bulbs were or when the dentist appointments were scheduled. I was just me. A woman. A person who could make a decision, a terrible, reckless, stupid decision all on her own. For a few hours I felt a spark. It was the girl I used to be before the marriage, before the kids, before my identity got buried under a mountain of responsibilities. It was selfish and awful and unforgivable, but it was also the only time I'd felt truly alive in years. Leaving was like waking up from a dream and stepping straight into a nightmare. The guilt hit me like a physical punch to the gut. What had I done? I had a husband and 2 beautiful kids at home. I had a life. A good life from the outside. And I'd just set a bomb under all of it. On the drive home, my mind was a hurricane. I called him, my voice shaking just a little. I told him I was on my way and asked if he wanted me to pick up some Thai food. It was a pathetic attempt at normalcy. A flimsy paper shield to hold up against the catastrophe I'd just created. He said, "Sure." I walked in the door carrying bags of pad thai and spring rolls, the smell filling the kitchen. He was in the living room watching TV. He didn't get up. He just looked over at me, his eyes tired. We ate dinner at the kitchen table, mostly in silence. It wasn't our usual empty silence. This was different. It was thick and heavy, filled with everything I couldn't say. He'd ask me how Sarah was, and I'd mumble something about her being fine. I couldn't look him in the eye. I just pushed noodles around my plate, my heart hammering against my ribs. I felt like I had a giant flashing sign over my head that said, "Liar." But he didn't press. He didn't ask questions. After we ate, we cleaned up the kitchen together, our arms brushing against each other as we put the dishes away. It was all so normal, so routine, it felt insane. We went to bed. He rolled over, and within minutes, I could hear his steady breathing as he fell asleep. I lay there in the dark for hours, staring at the ceiling, my guilt and the leftover thrill from the afternoon churning in my stomach. For a crazy second, I thought I might have gotten away with it. I thought maybe this was a secret I could just swallow and carry with me forever. Maybe tomorrow we could just wake up and keep going. I eventually fell asleep, exhausted by the emotional roller coaster. It felt like only minutes later when a light turned on, pulling me from a restless dream. He was standing by my side of the bed, not looking at me, but at my phone in his hand. The screen was lit up, casting a cold blue glow on his face. My heart didn't just drop. It stopped. The one thing that was mine, my private world, was being held like a piece of evidence. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice raspy with sleep and panic. He didn't answer. He just turned the screen towards me. It was Google Maps. My timeline. A red line snaked from my office building to a spot downtown, and then a bright red pin marking the name of the hotel. It showed I was there for almost 3 hours. It was all there. Undeniable digital proof of my betrayal. My breath caught in my throat. He finally looked at me, and his eyes weren't full of tears like the night before. They were cold. Dead. "Drinks with Sarah, huh?" he said, his voice quiet but sharp enough to cut glass. Something broke inside me. It wasn't guilt, not at first. It was a surge of white-hot rage. He had gone through my phone. He had snooped and spied and invaded the one last corner of my life I had for myself. "Why are you looking through my phone?" I snapped, sitting up, pulling the covers around me like armor. "You have no right to do that. That is my privacy." He laughed. It wasn't a real laugh. It was a short, bitter sound. "Your privacy. You went to a hotel with another man, and you're angry at me for violating your times. Privacy times." He held the phone up again, shaking it slightly. "The map doesn't lie, does it? Who is he?" The fight went out of me as quickly as it had come. The anger was just a flimsy shield, and he had shattered it. I looked at the map on the screen, at the cold, hard data of my sin, and there was nothing left to say. There were no more lies to tell. I slumped back against the pillows, the weight of what I had done finally crushing me. "I cheated," I whispered into the silent room. The words sounded ugly and cheap, like something from a bad TV show. They didn't capture the years of loneliness, the feeling of being invisible, the desperate need to feel like a person again. It was just a label, a brand. He didn't yell. He didn't scream. He just stood there for a long time looking at me as if I were a complete stranger. Then he walked out of the room, taking my phone with him. A few minutes later, I heard the creak of the living room couch, and that was it. The line had been drawn. Our marriage was now separated by a 50-foot hallway. The next morning was the most surreal experience of my life. I heard the kids get up. I heard him making them breakfast, the clatter of bowls and spoons echoing in the tense silence of the house. I finally forced myself out of bed and walked into the kitchen. He was standing at the stove, his back to me. The kids were at the table eating cereal. "Morning, Mommy," my daughter chirped. "Morning, sweetie," I said, my voice sounding fake even to my own ears. I poured myself a cup of coffee, my hand shaking. He didn't turn around. He didn't say a word. We were no longer husband and wife. We were two actors playing parents in a terrible play, trying not to let the audience know the whole set was on fire. We moved around each other in the kitchen, a careful, silent ballet of avoidance. It was 1,000 times worse than screaming. That's how it was for the next week. A deep, freezing cold settled over our house. We spoke only when we had to about the kids or a bill that needed to be paid. Our conversations were short, functional, and completely dead. He slept on the couch every night. I'd lie awake in our big empty bed, listening to him toss and turn, the sound of his unhappiness a constant torment. I'd see my phone charging on the kitchen counter again, back in its old spot. But now it felt like a bomb. He'd put it there, a symbol that there were no more secrets. Nothing was mine anymore. I know he thinks I did it for David, that I threw our family away for some guy from the office. But he's wrong. David was a symptom, not the disease. I destroyed our family for a feeling. I did it for a few hours, of feeling seen, of feeling like the main character in my own life, instead of a supporting role in everyone else's. It was a selfish, desperate, and catastrophic act of self-destruction. I chose a temporary escape over a permanent home. He started talking to a lawyer. I see the emails on the computer screen when I walk by. He's making plans for a life without me in it. And I can't even blame him. I'm the villain of this story. I know that. But what I don't think he'll ever understand, what he could never see from his side of the canyon between us, is that I had felt like a ghost in our marriage for years. And on that Thursday, I chose to become a monster instead, just so I could feel real again.
Story 6.
I'm sure you've heard my husband's side of the story. I'm the villain, the cheating wife who had an affair with a youth pastor. He's the poor, blindsided victim who did everything right. I'm not here to say I'm a saint. What I did was wrong. But there's a reason people break. And for 10 years, my husband was the one slowly chipping away at me until I finally shattered. When we got married, I thought he was the most amazing man I'd ever met. He was smart, driven, and he seemed to see a potential in me that I didn't even see in myself. At first, it was sweet. But that sweetness slowly turned into a project plan. I wasn't his wife. I was his fixer-upper. His love came with a to-do list. It started small. "Let's go to the gym together," he'd say. It sounded like a nice couple activity, but it was always followed by a comment about my progress or lack thereof. It wasn't about being healthy together. It was about me not being thin enough for him. Then it was about my job. I worked as a receptionist, and I liked it. It wasn't a career, but I was good at it. For him, it was an embarrassment. "Why don't you go back to school? I'll pay," he'd offer. It sounded generous, but the real message was loud and clear. You aren't educated enough. You aren't ambitious enough. You aren't times enough. Asterisk. Every part of my life was under his microscope. The way I dressed, the friends I had, the books I read. He saw me as a collection of flaws, overweight, underemployed, uneducated. He later admitted he was mean and that he was just trying to help me become his equal, but his words felt like tiny paper cuts day after day until I was just covered in them. I lived under the heavy, silent weight of his disappointment. I started to believe what he was telling me, that I was a failure. A few years ago, the direct comments stopped. I wish I could say it was because he finally accepted me, but it was worse. He just gave up. He retreated into his own world of academic studies and work, and our home became a library of silence. He remembers that time as being good. He's told people we had good conversation and good sex. I remember routine, I remember having sex on Tuesdays and Fridays because it was on the schedule. I remember conversations where he'd talk about his work for an hour, and when he finally asked about my day, his eyes would glaze over before I could finish a sentence. He wasn't my husband. He was my performance reviewer, and I'd failed my annual evaluation. I have never felt as lonely as I did, sitting on the couch next to him watching TV in complete silence. That's when I met Mark. He was the new youth pastor at our church. He was friendly, kind, and when he asked how you were doing, he actually waited for the answer. We started talking after service one Sunday. I was feeling particularly low, and I guess it showed on my face. He just asked if I was okay, and something inside me broke. I started talking, and I couldn't stop. I told him about the loneliness, about feeling like I could never measure up, about living with a man who made me feel invisible. He just listened. He didn't offer a 5-point plan to fix my life. He didn't tell me all the things I was doing wrong. He just nodded and said, "That sounds incredibly hard. I'm so sorry you're going through that." For the first time in years, I felt seen. I felt heard. He told me my feelings were valid. He told me I deserved to be happy. It started with coffee after church. Then it turned into texting during the week. He became the person I told everything to. He was my friend. He took my side, something my own husband never did. Was it an affair? Yes. It became one. And I know it was a betrayal. I live with that guilt every single day. But at the time, it felt less like I was betraying my husband and more like I was saving myself. I was suffocating in my own home, and my conversations with Mark were the only air I could get. I was so desperate for someone to tell me I was okay just the way I was, that I took that validation from the first person who offered it, without thinking about the consequences. The last few months, things at home got even worse. The silence became heavier, colder. My husband was distant in a way that felt different. I'd try to talk to him, and he'd give one-word answers while staring at his phone. I assumed he was just stressed with his studies, but there was an edge to him I couldn't quite place. I was trying to pull back from Mark, consumed with guilt, but the void at home just kept pulling me back. Then one night he just exploded. He came at me out of nowhere, accusing me of not loving him, of him not being important to me. He listed all the things he'd done for me, all the ways he'd tried to help me. The fight was brutal. It was like he was reading from a script of all my deepest insecurities. Hearing him say it all out loud, accusing me of being a failure as a wife, was devastating. It was also so close to the truth of how unhappy I was that it knocked the wind out of me. It was a horrifying, painful wake-up call. I looked at the man yelling at me, and I looked at the mess my life had become, and I knew I had to do something. I had to choose. I suggested I go stay with my parents for a couple of weeks. I told him we both needed to clear our heads to figure out if there was anything left to save. I wasn't running away. I was trying to find a way back. I thought if I could get some space from his constant silent judgment, I could find the strength to come back and really try. To end things with Mark for good. And dedicate myself to fixing what I had broken. I wanted to make it work. To my surprise, he agreed immediately. He was calm, almost gentle. When I was leaving, he hugged me at the door and said, "Take care of yourself." For the first time in months, I felt a tiny flicker of hope. Maybe this was our rock bottom. Maybe we could build from here. That hope lasted less than 24 hours. The next morning, I was having coffee with my mom in the kitchen when there was a knock on the door. It was a man in a cheap suit asking for me by name. He handed me a thick manila envelope. I opened it right there in the doorway, my mom looking over my shoulder. Divorce papers. I didn't understand at first. My brain just couldn't process it. I read the words, but they felt like a foreign language. Then I saw the date on the documents. He'd had a lawyer draft these over a month ago. A month! That meant for the last 30 days, every dinner we shared, every time he kissed me goodnight, every conversation, it was all a lie. The fight wasn't a moment of spontaneous anger. It was a planned-out performance. He pushed me into that fight so he would have a reason to get me out of the house. The hug at the door wasn't about hope. It was goodbye. I just started screaming. It wasn't even a word, just this horrible sound that came out of me. I couldn't breathe. My legs gave out, and I just collapsed onto the floor in my parents' hallway. My mom had to pick the papers up off the floor and call him because I couldn't speak. I just laid there sobbing while she stood in the kitchen, her voice shaking, asking him, "What did you do? What did you do to her?" He was perfectly calm, she told me later. He explained it all with the cold logic of a business transaction. He said it was the most efficient way to handle it. While I was a hysterical mess on the floor, he was executing the next phase of his plan. Later that day, my mom drove me to the store to get some things I hadn't packed. I tried to pay with my debit card. Decline. I tried the credit card. Decline. I called the bank thinking it was a mistake. It wasn't. He had already been to the bank that morning. He had frozen our joint credit card and transferred exactly half of our savings into a new account that I had no access to. He didn't just serve me with divorce papers. He cut off my entire life in a single morning. That's when the threat started. When I finally was able to talk to him on the phone, the man I had known for over a decade was gone. In his place was a cold, calculating stranger. He told me he knew everything. He'd been secretly reading my private text messages for weeks, maybe longer. He knew all about Mark. He said if I fought him on anything, the house, the money, anything, he would make sure the entire church found out. He would ruin Mark's career and reputation. And he would drag my name through the mud in court until I had nothing left. He used my affair as a weapon to guarantee my silence. He painted me as the unstable, cheating wife, and himself as the calm, rational victim who was just trying to manage a difficult situation. My mom tried to help me, calling him to figure out logistics, and he told me she was manipulating me and trying to turn me against him. He isolated me, cornered me, and made sure I was completely powerless. This wasn't a heartbroken man lashing out. This was an ambush. It was a planned military-style operation designed to cause the maximum amount of humiliation and pain. The divorce was a blur. I did what he said. My lawyer told me I could fight for more, but I was terrified. He had all the evidence, all the power, and all the control. He had spent a month planning his perfect victory while I was still trying to save our marriage. He took the house, most of the money, and our whole life together. He got to keep the narrative he had so carefully crafted, the good, patient husband who was betrayed by his ungrateful wife. The only thing I fought for was our dog, Charlie. He was a scruffy little terrier mix we'd adopted a few years back. In that silent, lonely house, Charlie was my only friend. He'd lay his head on my lap while I cried, and he was just happy to be near me. He didn't care if I was overweight or underemployed. He just loved me. My husband didn't even really want him, but he fought me on it at first just because he could. In the end, I think he gave in because it was the one thing he could use to show how generous he was. I got to keep the dog. I live in a small apartment. Just me and Charlie. Some days are so hard I can barely get out of bed. The guilt over what I did is something I'll carry forever. I betrayed my marriage, and I have to own that. But I also know that the man who planned my takedown with such breathtaking cruelty is the same man I was living with all along. The man who saw me as a project to be fixed, a problem to be solved. His love was always a transaction, and when I failed to hold up my end of the bargain by becoming the woman he wanted, he liquidated his assets. I was just an asset. I'm not a villain, and I'm not a victim. I'm just a woman who made a huge mistake while trying to escape a situation that was slowly crushing her spirit. He broke me down piece by piece for 10 years. I don't know who I am without him telling me all the ways I need to be better. But I'm starting to figure it out. It's quiet here, but it's not the lonely quiet of his disappointment. It's just quiet. And for the first time in a very long time, I feel like I can finally breathe. Story 7. Okay, I know what you're thinking. You've heard his side, and now I'm the monster. The crazy, cheating wife who threw away a perfect family. I get it. But you haven't lived inside my skin for the last 10 years. You haven't felt the silence that gets so loud it feels like screaming. I met my husband when I was 19. He was my first everything. By the time I was 29, I had a degree in literature that was basically just a fancy coaster on a shelf, and 3 beautiful kids. 3. A boy and 2 girls. They were my whole world, my whole identity. And my husband, he's a good man. Everyone says so. He's a dedicated father and a loving husband. And he is. But his dedication felt less like love and more like a cage he was building around me, bar by golden bar. He would look at me with this worship in his eyes like I was some goddess he'd captured and put on a pedestal in his living room. He loved the Times idea, Times of me. He loved the mother of his children. He loved the wife who kept a nice home. He never once stopped to ask if the woman inside that costume was still breathing. For years I felt this. Numbness. It was like watching my own life through a thick pane of glass. I'd be at a school play for my daughter, clapping with all the other moms, and I'd feel nothing. My son would score a goal in his soccer game, and I'd cheer, but the sound felt like it was coming from someone else. My husband would kiss me goodnight, and it was like a routine, a box to check off at the end of the day. Of course, when a woman feels this way, she's not just unhappy. She's broken. She needs to be fixed. He convinced me to see a doctor who took about 15 minutes to slap a label on me, bipolar. And what's the fix? Pills? Little white pills to smooth out the edges, to flatten the highs and lows, until you're just a straight, boring line that fits neatly back into the box they made for you. I tried them for a month. I felt like a ghost in my own home. I'd rather feel the pain of a crash than feel nothing at all. So I stopped taking. I wasn't sick. I was dormant. I was waiting for something to wake me up. I started looking for it. I read books and listened to podcasts, things my husband would call weird spiritual stuff. It was all about how our attachments are what cause us pain. The attachment to being a wife, a mother, a good girl. The philosophy was about letting go, about being radically honest with yourself and others, about finding what makes you feel alive and running toward it no matter what. It was the first thing that made sense to me in years. I needed to feel something. Anything. Even if it was messy. Then I met Alex. I know the first thing you'll say. He's 21. A kid. But his age didn't matter. What mattered was that when he looked at me, he didn't see a mom with minivan keys and a grocery list. He saw at times me asterisk. He saw the fire I thought had gone out years ago. We met at a workshop about conscious creation and wealth mindset. My husband thought I was at a book club. Alex and I talked for 3 hours straight. Not about mortgages or leaky faucets or who was picking up the kids from practice. We talked about the universe, about energy, about what it means to be truly free. He was the first person in a decade who asked me what I dreamed about. Being with him wasn't an affair. That word feels cheap and dirty. It was a coming home. The first time we were together, it was like a dam broke inside me. All the feeling, all the life I'd been holding back just came flooding out. I wasn't numb anymore. I was electric. Hiding, it felt like the real betrayal. This new philosophy I was following was about honesty. Radical. Terrifying honesty. To hide Alex would be to admit that what I was doing was wrong, and in my soul I knew it wasn't. It was necessary. It was survival. So I told my husband. I sat him down in our perfect living room on our sensible gray couch, and I didn't confess. I invited him in. I told him about Alex, and I told him that my love for Alex didn't take away from my love for him. It was different. I tried to explain polyamory, how it's not about being selfish, it's about expanding your heart to let more love in, not less. I thought maybe if he really loved times and not the idea of me, he would want me to be happy. He would want me to be whole. I suggested we could all evolve past this old possessive idea of love. He just stared at me. His face was blank for a long time. Then it turned red. He didn't see an invitation. He saw a rebellion. He started shouting, calling me a slut, a terrible mother. He was saying things that were so cruel I couldn't believe they were coming from him. Then his eyes landed on my little clock radio, on the nightstand, the one I used to wake up every morning to get the kids ready for school. He grabbed it and threw it with all his strength against the wall. It shattered into 100 pieces of black plastic. In that moment, he wasn't just breaking a cheap alarm clock. He was showing me what he does to things he can't control. For the first time in our entire marriage, I was afraid of him. After that, there was a week of cold, horrible silence. He slept on the couch. We moved around each other like ghosts. He thought his rage had won, that I would crawl back and apologize and promise to be his good little wife again. He was wrong. His violence just proved my point. Our marriage wasn't a partnership. It was a prison, and he was the warden. I knew then that words weren't enough. He couldn't understand because he couldn't see. He needed to see that Alex wasn't some monster trying to destroy our family. He was a person, a kind, intelligent soul. If they could just talk man to man, maybe he would get it. I texted Alex and asked him to come over that evening. I told him it was important. Then I went downstairs where my husband was watching TV, pretending I didn't exist. I stood in front of the screen. "We need to talk," I said. "For real this time. No more shouting." He muted the volume, his eyes full of hate. "What is there to talk about?" "I want you to understand," I said, my heart pounding. "I want you to see this isn't what you think it is. So I've asked Alex to come over. He'll be here in a few minutes. I want you two to meet." My husband's face went completely pale. He opened his mouth to say something to scream at me again, but before he could make a sound, the doorbell rang. For a second, nobody moved. The sound of the doorbell just hung there in the quiet room, a sound so normal it was insane. My husband's face was white. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. He looked at me then at the door, and for a moment I think he genuinely believed he was having a nightmare. I wasn't trying to be cruel. I was trying to be honest. I wanted to rip the bandage off and show him the wound wasn't fatal. We could heal this, but we had to look at it first. I walked to the door and opened it. Alex was standing there holding a small plant in a terracotta pot. A peace offering, maybe. He smiled when he saw me, a genuine, warm smile that reached his eyes. He looked young, of course, but he had this calmness about him, this centered energy that made him seem older than my husband in that moment. "Hey," he said softly. "You said it was important." "It is," I said, stepping aside to let him in. "Thank you for coming." He stepped inside, and his eyes immediately found my husband, who was now standing up by the couch, stiff as a board. My husband is not a small man, and he was using every inch of his height to try and be intimidating. He looked like a wolf whose territory had just been invaded. "Alex, this is my husband," I said, keeping my voice as steady as I could. "And this is Alex." Alex nodded politely. "It's good to meet you, sir." My husband didn't say anything. He just stared. The silence was thick and heavy, and I could feel my whole plan starting to crack. This wasn't a meeting of souls. This was a standoff. I wanted you both to meet, I said, trying to fill the quiet. Because this isn't about secrets. It's about honesty. It's about finding a way for all of us to... Get out of my house, my husband said. His voice was quiet, but it was scarier than his shouting. It was flat and dead and full of something ugly. Alex looked at me, then back at him. I think maybe we should talk. I'm not talking to you, my husband cut him off. I'm talking to my wife. He never took his eyes off Alex, though. You brought this child into my home, into the house where my kids sleep. He isn't a child. And the kids are at your mother's, I shot. I did this so you could see he isn't a threat, so you could understand that my connection with him doesn't have to destroy what we have. It could add to it. My husband let out a short, sharp laugh. It was a horrible sound. Add to it? You think this adds to it? He finally took a step toward Alex. You have no idea what you've walked into. You're a kid who got played by a sick, bored woman. That's not what this is, Alex said, his own calm finally starting to fray. He looked at me with confusion in his eyes. He thought this was going to be a mature adult conversation. I did too. I was so stupid. Don't you talk to him like that, I said, stepping between them. Don't you dare. My husband just looked right through me. Get out, he said to Alex again, his voice getting louder. Get out of my house before I throw you out. It was a pathetic display. All chest puffed out pride and wounded ego. He wasn't trying to understand or connect. He was just a dog marking his territory. Alex looked at me, and I saw the understanding in his face. Not understanding of our situation, but understanding that this was a lost cause. He saw the rage in my husband's eyes, the sheer refusal to even listen. He put the small plant down on the entryway table. I think I should go, he said to me. He wouldn't even look at my husband. He just walked to the door, opened it, and left. He didn't run. He just left. The click of the door shutting was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. I stood there staring at the closed door, and I felt something inside me just break. The last little piece of hope I had that my husband could see me, that he could love me for who I really was, just turned to dust. I turned to look at him, and my sadness boiled over into anger. Are you happy now? I whispered. He looked at me, his face red with fury and disbelief. Happy you? Bring your lover into our home and you ask me if I'm times happy, asterisk. I brought a person here, I screamed, the tears finally coming. I brought a beautiful, kind person here for you to meet. To show you that we could be better than this. That we could be more evolved than jealousy and possession. And you chased him away, you threatened him. He's a 1-year-old boy you're sleeping with. What did you expect? You wanted us to shake hands and talk about philosophy. Are you insane? No, I'm not insane, I sobbed. I'm just trying to feel something. I've been numb for 10 years, living in this perfect prison you built for me. And for the first time, I felt alive. I wanted to share that with you, and you just destroyed it. You smashed it just like you smashed my clock radio. This is not the same thing, he roared, pointing a shaking finger at me. This is our family, our children. Have you thought about them for 1 second in all of this? Think about them every second of every day, I cried. That's why I'm doing this. I don't want them to grow up with a mother who's a ghost. I want them to see a mother who is whole and happy and alive. Not one who is slowly dying inside because she's too scared to be honest. He just shook his head, looking at me like I was a stranger. Maybe I was. Maybe we both were. The fight just went out of him, replaced by a cold, heavy exhaustion. I don't even know who you are anymore, he said quietly. He walked past me, went upstairs, and I heard the door to the guest room close. And that was it. Alex was gone. My husband was gone, locked away in another room. I was alone in the living room, staring at the little plant on the table, a pathetic symbol of a peace that was never possible. And I mourned. I cried for the loss of Alex, for the loss of that electric feeling of being seen. I cried for the beautiful possibility my husband had just crushed with his ego. He thinks I'm mourning a 1-year-old boy. He's wrong. I'm mourning the death of my marriage. He's the one who killed it. He killed it the minute he decided it was better for me to be his numb, perfect wife in a cage than a messy, complicated, alive woman who was free. He thinks I'm the one who's sick. But a desire to feel, to be real, to be honest, that isn't an illness. Numbness is. And I'm not going back to being numb. Not ever. Our marriage wasn't a partnership. It was a prison. And he wasn't my husband. He was my warden. A warden is the last person who can ever set you free.
Story 8.
I know what people say about me. I'm the wife who cheated, the one who kicked him out the day before his birthday. I'm the villain in his story, and maybe I am. But stories are never that simple, are they? You only ever hear one side, and his side makes me sound like a monster. I just want for once for someone to understand why. When I met him in March of 2013, it was like a movie. He was funny, charming, and so incredibly kind, especially to my son. I was a single mom, and the way he looked at my boy like he was already his own, it melted me. I finally saw a future that wasn't just me struggling alone. I saw a family. We fell fast and hard, and for 2 perfect months, it felt like we were building the start of a real life. Then in May, I got the call. There are moments that slice your life into a before and an after. And that was mine. He was in the hospital. His heart. The doctors used words like massive and catastrophic. They spoke in quiet, serious voices that didn't leave much room for hope. Seeing him in that hospital bed, hooked up to a dozen machines so pale and weak, it was the most terrified I've ever been. Some people would have run. We'd only known each other for a few months. But I didn't. I ran towards him. I looked at this man fighting for every single breath, and I thought, this is it. This is what love is. It wasn't a choice. It was an instinct. I spent every single day of his recovery in that uncomfortable hospital chair. I learned the names of his nurses, I learned how to read the beeps on the monitors, and I talked to him for hours even when he was too sedated to answer. I told him about our future. I told him he had to pull through for me, for my son. I believed with every part of my being that I could be his reason to live. The day before he was discharged, my hands were shaking, but my voice was clear. I asked him to marry me. People called me crazy, said it was too fast, that it was just the trauma talking. But to me, it was a promise. It was me telling him and the universe that we had already survived the worst thing that could possibly happen. I was promising him that I would be there to help him build the beautiful, happy life he deserved after all that pain. And for a little while it worked. We got married, we built a home. I loved being his wife. I loved watching him teach my son how to throw a baseball. I looked at our life and I felt so proud. I really truly thought that my love had been enough. I thought I had saved him. But you can't save someone from the battle inside their own head. The heart surgery was a crisis, but his depression, that was the war. It was a quiet, creeping thing he'd lived with since he was a kid, a ghost that followed him into our marriage and sat at our dinner table every night. The crisis was over, but the man I married was still drowning, just more slowly now. I tried. God, I tried so hard. I cooked healthy meals to help him recover. I planned fun weekend trips to get him out of the house. I encouraged him to talk to someone, to find a hobby to do, times anything asterisk. It was like pouring water into a bucket full of holes. Nothing I did could fill the emptiness inside him. He'd just give me that tired, empty smile and retreat back into himself. The breaking point for us, the moment I think we truly started to die, was in 2015. I was so tired. I was working full-time, raising my son and spending every spare ounce of energy trying to pull him out of his darkness. I was exhausted, down to my bones. We were having another one of those circular conversations where I was begging him to fight, and he was just staring blankly at the wall. In a moment of sheer desperation, the words just fell out of my mouth. I said, if I knew this was going to be our life forever, I don't know if I would have been strong enough to sign up for it. I saw the light go out in his eyes. He heard, I regret marrying you. I don't want you. What I was screaming, what I meant was, I'm drowning right next to you and I need your help to save us both. Please grab my hand. He never grabbed it. After that day, he let go completely. That's when the weight gain started. He ballooned up to 326 pounds over the next 2 years. And please, don't think this was about me not finding him attractive. I didn't care about the weight on his body. I cared about what it meant. It was a physical sign of him giving up. Every pound was another layer of armor he was putting on to keep me and life out. He was eating his sadness, burying himself in it. He stopped leaving the house. He stopped playing with my son. He just existed. Our home became a prison and I was the warden. My life was a rotation of cooking for him, cleaning up after him, and begging him to get off the couch. I wasn't his wife anymore. I was his full-time caregiver, his nursemaid, and he wasn't even a willing patient. I was 35 years old, and I was watching my life and my son's childhood get eaten alive by this suffocating gray fog of his apathy. The affair wasn't about love or passion. It was a pathetic, desperate attempt to breathe. In November of 2017, I met someone. A conversation over coffee turned into a lunch. It was the first time in years someone had looked at me and seen a woman, not just a caretaker. For a few stolen hours, I wasn't responsible for anyone's happiness but my own. It was wrong, I know it was. But it was also the first time I had felt alive, and not just trapped in a very, very long time. I was juggling 2 lives, and the guilt was eating me alive. But the relief was just as strong. I'd come home from a stolen afternoon, my heart pounding, and walk into the silence of our house. He'd be on the couch in the same spot I left him, the TV flickering across his blank face. He'd ask where I'd been, and I'd lie. Running errands, I'd say. He'd just nod, not really caring. The secret was mine to keep. Tonight, I came home late again. I tossed my keys in the bowl by the door. My whole body tense. He was sitting in the living room in the dark. That wasn't unusual. But when I flicked on the lamp, I saw he wasn't watching TV. He was just sitting there holding my phone in his hand. He looked up at me, and his face was a mask I'd never seen before. Quiet, calm, broken. "Who is he?" he asked, his voice perfectly level. My heart stopped. The air in the room went thin and cold. For a second, I thought about lying. I could have made up a story, tried to talk my way out of it. But looking at his face so devoid of emotion, I knew it was pointless. And honestly, I was tired of the lies. The secret was a heavy weight, and a huge part of me was relieved it was finally over. I didn't answer his question. I just sank onto the arm of the opposite couch and let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding for years. "It doesn't matter who he is," I said, my voice shaking a little. "He's not the problem. He's a symptom." He just stared at me. No yelling, no tears, no anger. Nothing. That was the most painful part. I almost wished he would scream at me, throw something, call me every name in the book. At least that would have been a sign of life. A sign that he still cared enough to be hurt. But all I got was that same empty, passive look I'd been getting for years. It was the look he had when the TV was on, when he was eating dinner, when I was begging him to get help. It was the look of a man who had already checked out. "This," I said, waving my hand around the silent dark room, "this is the problem. This house, this life. I'm drowning, and you won't even try to swim. You just let the current pull you under, and you're pulling me and my son down with you. The dam just broke. All the resentment, the loneliness, the suffocating frustration of the last few years came pouring out of me. I told him how I felt like his mother, not his wife. How I cooked and cleaned and begged and pleaded while he just sat on the couch and let himself disappear. I told him how my son had stopped asking when his dad was going to play catch with him. I told him that I missed the man. I fell in love with the man who fought for his life in that hospital, and I didn't know who this stranger was sitting in front of me. He didn't defend himself. He didn't argue. He just sat there and took it, absorbing my words like a sponge. When I finally ran out of steam, my throat raw and my eyes burning, there was just silence. Then he finally spoke again, his voice flat. "So you want a divorce?" It wasn't a question. It was a statement. He already knew. The affair was just the excuse I needed, and he knew that too. "Yes," I said. The word was small, but it felt like the biggest thing I'd ever said. "It's over. I can't do this anymore." "Okay," he said. "Just okay." That was it. That was the end of our marriage. Not with a bang, but with a quiet, tired sigh. I had to get him out. I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that if he stayed another night, I would lose my nerve. My rescuer instinct would kick back in. I'd see his sad eyes, and I'd start trying to fix it all over again, and we'd be trapped in this same miserable cycle forever. I couldn't let that happen. My son deserved better. I deserve better. "You need to leave," I said, my voice hardening. "You need to pack a bag and go." For the first time, a flicker of something crossed his face. Hurt. Now, tonight. Yes. Tonight. Then I remembered. My stomach twisted into a knot of guilt. Tomorrow was his birthday. Kicking your husband out the night before his birthday? Who does that? A monster, that's who. The timing was cruel, and I knew it. But it was also necessary. It was a clean break. A brutal, horrible, necessary break. If I let him stay for his birthday, what about the day after? What about Christmas? There would always be a reason to wait. And I couldn't wait anymore. He didn't fight me on it. He just nodded slowly, pushed himself up from the couch with a grunt, and walked to our bedroom. I stayed in the living room listening to the sounds of him opening and closing drawers. The sounds of a life being packed into a single duffel bag. 10 minutes later, he came out bag in hand, jacket on. He didn't look at me. He just walked to the front door. His hand was on the doorknob when he stopped. "I loved you," he said, his back still to me. "The man you met. He loved you." "I know," I whispered to the empty room, long after the door had clicked shut behind him. I loved him too. The first few days were a blur of numb relief and crushing guilt. The silence in the house was huge. At first it felt like freedom. Then it just felt empty. I had to tell my son. I sat him down and explained that we wouldn't be living together anymore, that it wasn't his fault that we both loved him very much. He was quiet for a long time, and then just asked if his dad was ever going to get better. I didn't have an answer for him. The news spread, of course. his family called screaming at me. Friends I thought were mine suddenly stopped answering my texts. The story was simple and clean. I was the evil wife who cheated and threw her sick husband out on the street. I was the villain. I didn't bother trying to explain my side. What was the point? How do you explain the slow death of a marriage? How do you describe the feeling of being suffocated by someone else's sadness? You can't. So I let them think what they wanted. I failed him. I know that. The woman who made that promise in the hospital, the woman who believed her love could fix a broken heart, she failed. My love wasn't a magic pill. It couldn't fix childhood trauma, and it couldn't cure clinical depression. I tried to carry him for so long, but he was too heavy. But he failed us too. A marriage is supposed to be two people holding each other up, and I was the only one holding. He gave up on himself, and in doing so, he gave up on me and the family we were supposed to be building. I couldn't fix his heart, and I couldn't fix his mind. The only thing I could do was save what was left. I had to choose between letting all three of us drown in his depression or getting my son and myself to shore. I chose us. It was an act of self-preservation, the most selfish and most necessary thing I've ever done. I broke my promise, and I have to live with that. But when I watch my son playing in the yard now, laughing freely in a house that no longer feels heavy and gray, I know I made the only choice I had left. Story 9. I'm sure my husband has already posted his side of the story. I know how it sounds. I'm the monster who blew up a nearly 30-year marriage for a cheap affair with my boss. He probably painted a picture of our perfect life, and he wouldn't be lying. From the outside, it was perfect. We had it all. 29 years together, 26 of them married. 2 amazing kids, both grown and out of the house, good careers, a beautiful home that was finally paid off. We were even making plans for the next chapter. He was going to ease up at his company, I was going to go part-time, and we were going to travel, see the world. It was the dream everyone works for. He believes in that dream because he built it. Our life was his greatest project, and he is a perfectionist. Every holiday was perfect. Every family photo was perfect. Our finances were perfect. I was part of that perfection. The supportive wife, the loving mother, the partner who stood by his side. And for a long time, I was happy to play that part. But what he won't tell you about, because he honestly never noticed it, was the silence. After our youngest left for college, the house got quiet. And the quiet just grew and grew until it was all I could hear. Our conversations became status updates. How are the kids? Did you call the plumber? What's the plan for the weekend? He'd tell me about his day at his workshop, the projects he was tinkering with, and I'd listen. But he never really asked about me. Not really times me. Asterisk. He saw the wife, the mom, the manager of our home. He didn't see Ashley anymore. I don't think he'd looked for her in years. He loved his solitude. He'd spend hours in his shop happy in his own world, and he thought I was happy in mine. He didn't understand that my world had become incredibly lonely. I was standing right next to him, but I felt a million miles away. When he'd talk about our future, about all this time we were going to spend together, my heart would sink. It didn't sound like freedom. It sounded like a life sentence in a beautiful, empty museum. Then my boss Mark started paying attention to me. Please don't think it was some sleazy, predictable thing. It didn't start like that. It started with him asking Ashley, "What's your take on this?" during a meeting. He actually wanted my opinion. He listened when I spoke. He'd remember little things I'd said and bring them up later. It was like a drink of water after years of being thirsty. We started having lunch just to talk about work, and then it became about more than work. I felt seen. I felt interesting again. I felt real. The compliments and the flirting came later, but by then I was already hooked on the validation. I felt like myself for the first time in a decade. My husband wasn't a bad man, he just stopped seeing me. Mark saw me. He wasn't trying to be a replacement. He was just a man who made me feel like I hadn't disappeared completely. The first time we went to a hotel, it wasn't some grand, passionate decision. It was a moment of weakness that felt like a surrender. I was just so tired of feeling numb, and he made me feel something. Those 9 months were not some exciting romance. They were hell. It was a constant gut-wrenching spiral of guilt and lies. I would leave Mark in the afternoon and drive home to my husband, who would greet me with a smile and a kiss, asking how my day was. He had no idea. He was so trusting, so sure of us. And every time he'd smile at me, it felt like a knife twisting in my chest. He thinks I'm a cold, calculating liar. The truth is, I was unraveling. The work convention was a breaking point for me. He wanted to come along, make a little vacation out of it. He'll tell you I made up excuses, that I lied so I could have a secret weekend with Mark. And I did lie. But it wasn't because I wanted to be with Mark. It was because I couldn't stand the thought of my two worlds crashing into each other. I couldn't imagine standing there holding my husband's hand, playing the part of the happy, dedicated wife, while Mark was in the same room. I couldn't fake it. It was an act of pure cowardice. I was trying to protect my husband from a mess I created because I was too weak to fix it. I tried to end it with Mark several times. But every time I did, I'd go home to that crushing silence, to the feeling of being a ghost in my own life. And the loneliness would push me right back. It was an addiction to feeling wanted. And I was a desperate addict. Bringing him to our house was the stupidest, most reckless thing I have ever done. It was January 29th. Our anniversary was the next day, and my husband was supposed to be working late. He'd been swamped all week. I don't have a good reason for it. It wasn't about comfort or disrespect. Looking back, I think it was a subconscious cry for help. A final, insane act of self-sabotage. Maybe some broken part of me wanted it all to blow up because I couldn't find the courage to confess and light the fuse myself. We were in our bed, our marital bed. The shame of that will never leave me. I felt safe in the moment, sure that we were alone, that my lie was still holding. We were upstairs when I heard the garage door open. My blood went cold. It was too early. Way too early. I heard footsteps on the stairs and then the sound of our bedroom door swinging open. I looked up terrified to see my husband standing there holding a cake box. He just smiled a wide, happy, innocent smile and yelled, Surprise! I finished early so we could start our anniversary celebration tonight. The smile on his face didn't just fade, it vanished. It was like a switch was flipped, and the warm, loving man I'd known for 3 decades was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp-edged stranger. The cake box slipped from his hand and landed on the carpet with a soft, muffled thud. For a long, silent second, nobody moved. The air was thick and heavy, and I couldn't breathe. Then he closed the bedroom door, the click of the latch sounding like a gunshot. He didn't yell. He didn't cry. That would have been easier to handle. Instead, a terrifying calm settled over him. He looked at Mark, who was trying to cover himself with a pillow, then his eyes landed on me. There was nothing in them. No anger, no sadness, just nothing. It was like looking at a stranger. "Get up," he said, his voice flat and low. He pointed at Mark's clothes, which were in a heap on a chair. "Don't touch those." He walked out of the room for a moment and came back, dragging the heavy armchair from our reading corner. He wedged it firmly against the door, then sat down, blocking our only exit. He was the judge, and we were the naked, pathetic prisoners in his courtroom. He pulled out his phone. "You're going to tell me everything," he said. "It wasn't a request." I started to sob, begging him to stop, to just yell at me, to throw something. Anything but this cold, controlled punishment. He just looked at me, his face a stone mask. "Start from the beginning. Both of you." And so we did. He recorded everything. He made us detail the whole 9 months. Every lie, every hotel, the convention. He made Mark explain why he did it, and he made me explain why. It wasn't about him wanting to understand. I could see it in his eyes. Every humiliating detail he extracted from us was a piece of ammunition he was collecting. He wasn't a man in pain. He was a general planning his war. The worst part came when he was done with us. He calmly picked up Mark's phone from the nightstand. I knew what was about to happen, and a different kind of terror, a primal one, shot through me. "No," I whispered, then screamed it. "Please don't. You can't do this to her. She hasn't done anything." He actually smiled then, a thin, cruel twist of his lips. "You're worried about times, him times, about times, her times," he thought. I was defending my lover. He didn't get it. I was watching the man I shared my life with, the father of my children, turn into someone capable of gleefully destroying another person's world just for the satisfaction of revenge. I wasn't trying to protect Mark. I was horrified by what my husband was becoming. He ignored me. He found Mark's wife Carol in the contacts and hit the FaceTime button. My heart hammered against my ribs. After a few rings, her tired, smiling face appeared on the screen. "Hey, honey, is everything okay?" she asked. My husband didn't say a word. He just turned the phone around, aiming the camera first at Mark huddled in our guest bathrobe, and then at me, clutching the sheets to my chest in our bed. I saw the confusion on Carol's face turn to horror, then to a gut-wrenching silent scream as she understood. Her face crumpled. He let her see it for a few more seconds before he hung up a look of grim satisfaction on his face. He had won. He hadn't just exposed me. He had created another victim, and in his mind that made us even. He finally stood up from the chair. He looked at me, really looked at me for the first time since he'd walked in. "Pack a bag," he said. "Get out of my house." I stumbled out of bed, grabbing random clothes from my closet, my hands shaking so badly I could barely zip the suitcase. I didn't cry anymore. I was just numb, hollowed out. As I walked past him to leave the room we had shared for over 20 years, I wanted to say something. "I'm sorry." He felt stupidly small. "I love you" felt like a lie he would never believe again. But he didn't even look at me. He just stared straight ahead, as if I were already gone. I walked out that front door and into the cold night air, leaving behind the only life I had ever known. A life I had set on fire not because I hated it, but because I was too lonely and too cowardly to ask for what I needed. I spent that first night in a hotel 20 miles away. I didn't sleep. I just sat on the edge of the bed and replayed that scene over and over. The next morning, the text started. "My daughter, my sweet girl," wrote Dad, "told us everything. I don't even know who you are anymore." My son didn't even use words. He just blocked my number. That was when the real pain hit, a physical agony in my chest that made it hard to breathe. Of course I was fired. Mark was fired. His marriage imploded in a way that I'm sure was even messier than mine. I had not just broken my own family, I had helped detonate his. I speak to my lawyer now more than I speak to anyone else. My husband is, as expected, meticulous in his destruction. He wants the house, the savings, everything. He wants to erase me. I know I'm the villain in this story. I own that. I made a series of selfish, destructive choices. I betrayed the one person who always believed he could count on me. But I wish he could see that the affair wasn't the disease. It was a symptom of something that had been quietly dying for years. My desperate, stupid attempt to feel alive ended up killing everything I ever cared about. He sees my affair as an attack on him, but it was really an act of self-destruction. And now I'm left here in the rubble, completely and truly alone. And for the first time, I can hear the silence for what it really is. The sound of the end.
Story Teen.
I guess he told you everything. He probably painted a perfect picture of me as the villain, the cheating wife who threw away nearly 20 years for her boss. It's a simple story, and simple stories are easy to believe. But the truth isn't simple. It's quiet and complicated, and it dies a slow death in a silent living room over a decade. Our marriage didn't end the day I moved out. It ended slowly, one quiet evening at a time. For years, our house felt like a museum. Everything was in its right place, clean and tidy, but no one was allowed to touch anything. There was no life in it. Just two people walking through the halls, careful not to make a sound. We were friends for almost 20 years, married for 13 and a half of them. You don't just throw that away. You watch it crumble piece by piece until you can't remember what it looked like when it was whole. He told you our intimate life was non-existent. He's right. But he saw it as some kind of noble sacrifice he was making for me. For us. It wasn't a sacrifice. It was a symptom of the disease. The truth is, he had checked out long before I did. He was content with a roommate. Someone to share bills with to make sure the trash went out on Tuesdays. He didn't want a wife. He wanted a house manager. I tried in the beginning. I'd ask about his day, and he'd grunt something about spreadsheets while scrolling through his phone. I'd try to start a conversation about a movie or something I read, and he'd give me a one-word answer, his eyes glued to the TV. Eventually, I just stopped trying. It was less painful to accept the silence than to keep sending out words and having them fall dead on the floor between us. The silence became my companion. It was heavy and suffocating. That's when I started going to bed early. At first it was 8:30, then 8. By the last year I was often in bed by 7 p.m. right after dinner. He probably thought I was always tired. I wasn't tired. I was escaping. Lying in the dark, scrolling on my own phone was better than sitting on the couch next to him, drowning in the silence. The hours between dinner and when he finally came to bed were the loneliest hours of my day. I was disappearing right in front of him, and he never even noticed. My job was my only other escape. I've worked for the same man, my boss, for over 10 years. This wasn't some whirlwind office romance. It was a friendship built over thousands of cups of bad coffee and stressful deadlines. We were just work friends for years, but then things started to change. I'd stay a little late to finish a project, and he'd be there too. And we'd talk. Not about anything secret or flirty. We'd talk about our kids. We'd talk about our spouses. We'd talk about feeling tired. I saw the same look in his eyes that I felt in my own soul. It was the quiet exhaustion of being married to someone who doesn't see you anymore. He was lonely too. He was the only person in the world who understood. When I spoke, he listened. He actually heard the words I was saying. He'd ask follow-up questions. He remembered things I'd told him weeks ago. It was like drinking water after dying of thirst. He made me feel like a person again. So yes, I started working later. I took on side jobs, anything that would keep me away from that silent house. I needed to be where someone saw me. Then came the night my husband finally wanted to talk. He told me he'd worked up the courage. I just felt relief. It was like I'd been holding my breath for years, waiting for the other shoe to drop, and it finally did. He started talking about our problems, about how we drifted apart. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just looked at him and said, I think we should get a divorce. I know how that sounds. Cold. Sudden. But it wasn't. For me, that decision had been made a long time ago in 1,000 silent moments on the couch. I told him our marriage was beyond fixing, and it was the honest truth. I had already mourned us. I had already cried all my tears in the dark while he slept soundly next to me. He was just starting the conversation. I was already at the end of the book. I insisted that we do it amicably. He probably thinks that was part of some grand manipulative plan. It wasn't. It was the last bit of respect I could show for the boy I'd been friends with since we were practically kids. I didn't want to end our 20-year story with lawyers and screaming matches. I wanted to close the book gently. So we did. In 2 weeks, we had divided everything. The house, the bank accounts, the furniture. It was shockingly easy, like two business partners dissolving a company. The only thing I asked was that we keep it off social media for a while. Again, not because I was hiding something. It was for my boss. We weren't together, not yet, but we both knew where this was going. His own marriage was falling apart, a mirror image of mine. We needed a minute to figure out how to detonate our lives without taking everyone else down with us. We needed to tell our families to get our heads straight before the court of public opinion had its say. The day he moved his last box out of the house was surreal. I stood in the empty living room, the echo of his footsteps still hanging in the air. For the first time in years, the silence didn't feel heavy. It just felt empty. It was over. I called my boss. He knew my husband was moving out that day. "It's done," I said. My voice didn't even shake. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then he said, "My wife and I had the talk last night. I'm staying at a hotel." This is insane. We were both adrift. 2 shipwrecks in the same storm. "Don't stay in a hotel," I told him. "Just come here. We can figure it out together." He showed up the next day with 2 suitcases. It wasn't a triumphant romantic moment. It was a crisis decision. 2 people terrified and broken, clinging to the only other person in the world who understood the blast. We sat on the floor of our empty living room, not even talking, just breathing the same air. I felt this tiny, fragile spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, the worst was over. Maybe now we could start to heal. I was wrong. The worst wasn't over. It was just getting started. For maybe a day there was a strange, fragile peace. We ordered pizza and ate it on the floor. We talked about logistics lawyers telling our kids. It felt like we were in a bunker together, waiting out a storm. We were 2 broken people trying to figure out how to put ourselves back together, and maybe, just maybe, our broken pieces would fit. It wasn't love, not yet. It was alliance. It was understanding. And for the first time in a decade, I wasn't lonely. Then my phone rang. It was him, my ex-husband. I answered expecting a question about a piece of mail or a password for a streaming service. Instead, there was just fury on the other end of the line. A kind of rage I hadn't heard from him in 20 years. "His car is in the driveway," he spat. He must have driven by. His car is in my time's driveway. "It's not your driveway anymore," I said, my voice colder than I intended. "The boss's wife called me," he said, and my stomach dropped to the floor. Of course she did. A woman scorned. It's the oldest story in the book. She told me everything. How long? Huh? How long have you been sneaking around behind my back? Was it the whole 10 years? All those late nights at the office? Those side jobs? Were you laughing at me this whole time? The questions came like machine gun fire. I could feel my boss watching me from across the room, his face pale. I walked into the kitchen, needing a wall between me and his pity. "There's nothing to tell," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Nothing to tell. You moved him into my house the day after I left. You think I'm an idiot. All that crap about an amicable split and honoring our friendship. You just wanted me out of the way so you could move your boyfriend in. You played me." And that's when I felt it. Not guilt, not shame. Just a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. I was so tired of it all. I didn't have the energy to fight to build a lie or to defend a version of events he would never believe anyway. So I just gave him the truth. "I've been checked out for years," I said the words, feeling small and hollow. "For years. I was gone long before he and I ever got close." There was silence on the other end. I think he was expecting a fight denial's tears. He wasn't prepared for surrender. "So it's true," he whispered. The rage was gone, replaced by a brokenness that cut me deeper than the anger did. "You did this." "I let it happen," I corrected him. "We both did." "You can't tell me you were happy." "I was willing to work on it," he yelled, the anger flaring back. "You never even gave me a chance. You just threw it all away." He was right. I hadn't given him a chance. Because by the time he realized there was a problem, my heart had already turned to dust. I had nothing left to give him. The well was dry. I had used my last drops of energy just surviving the silence every night. "I have to go," I said. It was a coward's way out, but I couldn't do it anymore. I hung up before he could say another word. I slid down the kitchen cabinet and sat on the cold floor. My boss came in and sat a few feet away, not touching me. He just waited. "She called him," I said. "She told him we've been having this long affair." "I know," he said quietly. "She told me she would. She wants to burn it all down." And that's exactly what it felt like. A fire. A fire that was burning down two families, and we were standing in the middle of it. The simple story had won. To the rest of the world, to his ex-wife, to my ex-husband, to any friends who would hear the story, we were the villains. Cheaters who had plotted and schemed to be together. They would never see the years of loneliness. They'd never understand the silent dinners, the early bedtime, the desperate need to be seen by another human being. They would only see the ending the wife who moved in with her boss the day after her husband left. He's right to feel betrayed. I get that. In his mind, he went from having a stable, if quiet, marriage to being replaced in less than 24 hours. The timeline is damning. It looks calculated. It looks cruel. But my crime wasn't cheating on him in that final year. My crime was giving up on us 5 years before that and never having the courage to say it out loud. My crime was letting the silence fester until it killed everything good we ever had. I let him believe we were okay because it was easier than having the fight. I let him think I was just tired or stressed from work. I let him become a roommate because I didn't have the strength to demand a husband. He sees a calculated plot, a secret affair planned with cold precision. I see a desperate, clumsy, messy escape. It wasn't a well-thought-out plan. It was two people drowning, and we grabbed onto the only other person in the water. I know I hurt him. I know I blew up his world. I'll have to live with that. But I also know that if I had stayed, I would have disappeared completely. I would have faded away on that living room couch until there was nothing left of me at all. And that was a price I just wasn't willing to pay anymore.